So Courtney Henderson, who is a member at large and an LWVMA board member, is going to moderate our panel. Thank you, Courtney. And the rest of our panelists, Nancy Brown from League of Women Voters Concord Carlisle, Katie Hallett from the League in Salem, Jean Morrison from the Cape Cod Area League, and Domenica Perrone from the Worcester Area League. So thank you all so much. We're going to be talking about all of their experience in helping to build a more inclusive league, and also leading to their efforts to build a more inclusive electorate, which is the theme of the day.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me? I don't have a middle voice. Either I talk too low or I talk too loud. So is this good? Okay, good. Awesome. And thank you all for showing out. I love the work that we're doing. And it's always great to see all of us in one room doing that work. So before we jump in, I just want to make some quick definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion to kind of set the foundation of this panel discussion. And then we'll jump right in and kind of go from there. So these definitions come from the LWVUS. So diversity refers to population groups that have been historically underserved in socially, politically, or economically powerful institutions and organizations. Next, I want to define equity. Equity prioritizes efforts to ensure the most underserved and marginalized among us have as much as an opportunity to succeed as the most well-served and advantaged. And lastly, inclusion refers to the degree to which a diverse set of individuals are able to participate fully in collaboration, strategizing, and decision-making within an organization or a group. So now that we've laid that foundation, I would like to pose the first question to all four of you, and we can go in order in how you all are seated. And that first question is to describe the project or activities your league has been working on in the DEI space.
Yes, we'll start my side. Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Hopefully. So hi everyone, my name is Domenica Perrone and I am a part of the Worcester Area League. I am a participant on our diversity committee, and one of the first things that we talked about early on was really integrating all of our goals and efforts throughout the other committees. And so I think something, and myself and some of my other colleagues who couldn't be here today but are part of that committee, we participate on several DEI committees in different spaces. And something we always want to push is ensuring that DEI committees aren't the only ones doing DEI work. And so we're very lucky to have support across all of our committees and ways of integrating DEI efforts through our events, through voter registration. And in particular, I want to underscore voter registration because I became involved with the league as a Latina, as someone who sees herself as a community organizer. I found myself face-to-face working with the league previous to me joining because they were doing voter registration on the ground. And they were doing voter registration at local shelters, transitional housing spaces, vaccine clinics, as was previously mentioned, naturalization ceremonies is a big one. And so really underscoring our efforts in terms of integration through our events that we're planning, as well as the voter registration efforts, and of course, our middle school civic engagement efforts as well, because we all know that that's an important age group to start engaging.
Thank you. I'm Nancy Brown, and I'm with the Concord Carlisle League. I'm sorry that my voice is not great this morning, but I hope you can hear me. We formed a DEI committee several years ago, at the time of George Floyd, when everyone was suddenly realizing that things were not the way we thought they were. And our committee, one of the first things we did was work to establish a DEI commission. in Concord. When we met with the select board initially, we did not seem terribly interested, but we got a large contingent of league people and other people who joined us at meetings. And lo and behold, they formed a DEI commission. And we have been working to support that commission. Initially, well, the other thing we did about the same time was have a series of lectures on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The lectures started off just looking at the history. Native Americans, how are we dealing with them? Slaves in Concord in earlier times, and ultimately Concord became very active. We had many people involved in the abolition movement. However, Concord today is not a diverse community. We have a very small number of African Americans and people. There are stories of people moving in because of schools, but leaving because they didn't feel welcome. So that has been a main thrust. We had these lectures that, yes.
We're having a hard time hearing you.
Why don't they stand? Is this better? Okay. So our DEI committee worked hard for the formation of a DEI commission. And then last fall, we had a series of lectures on DEI topics, including the history, Native Americans in Concord, how were they treated? How about African Americans and other minorities? And we also looked at what's happening in education. There's probably more happening regarding education than in other areas. And the school does have a large number of different ethnic and racial students. So it's more diverse, but they're working hard. They have a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer. We do not yet have that in Concord, but we are working towards establishing one and getting funding. And we had a warrant article supporting the concept and are hopeful to have a warrant article that will provide for the actual funding next year. So there's a lot of activity. There's a tremendous amount to be done. The work goes forward.
Thank you, Nancy. Katie. My name is Katie Hallett. I am the convener for the League of Women Voters Salem. Our work in this area has primarily focused on a few areas. Partnerships with other existing community groups is one that we put a lot of energy into. We took our lead from Salem United, which is a Salem community group, in supporting the Negro Election Day legislation, which made Negro Election Day a holiday. That's something that's been celebrated in Salem for quite some time. Salem United organizes that event, and that honors the history of the first Black voting system in America, which predates the United States. We think that was really important because we think including everyone's history in the story of this country is vital to understanding where we're going and where we've been. We've also worked somewhat with the North Shore Juneteenth Association. We've offered our partnership and our hands to support their existing events in support of that newly recognized by the state holiday. We also have some members who are on the Latino Leadership Coalition in Salem as well. One of our steering committee members is on the board of that organization. So we really try in this area to not push ourselves forward and kind of parachute in with our ideas of what other people in our community need. We also try to be very visible within our community at a variety of events. So at the Negro Election Day celebration, we'll be tabling, we'll be doing voter registration, we'll be marching in Salem North Shore Pride again this year. We have a very prominent affordable housing working group, which we know that's a problem. In Salem, gentrification is a problem, but across the state, it's a huge issue. And that's another axis of inclusion. If you're not having everyone across the income spectrum represented, then you're missing a huge segment of your community. So those are the primary areas in which we put our energy. And we try to, whenever we're discussing any action we're going to take, think about who are the stakeholders here? Who do we need to be bringing in on the work that we're doing? This is by no means work that we have finished. This is very much an ongoing process. We are still not a very diverse league, even though we're within a diverse community. And that's something that we're working to correct. We're actively thinking about it every time we meet. Oh, I forgot to mention one other thing that we are doing is having all of our forums translated into Spanish, because we do have a large Spanish speaking population in Salem. So making things accessible for the people in our community is a huge priority to us. So that's sort of the work that we've been doing.
Excuse me, I don't know what happened to my voice. I'm usually a very loud person. Can you hear me? Okay. Most things have been mentioned, but so I'm going to take a little different approach. I'm from the Cape Cod Area League. And our sister league is Falmouth. So I am kind of an example of, I don't want to say this in the wrong way, so of diversity efforts for the Cape Cod League, frankly, who started their DEI work after they became aware of the US policy and programs. So I'm lucky when I was recruited to join the league, I felt like the culture was set and poised, that everybody agreed this is important work to do. What to do is another story. We're still working on that. And you're absolutely right that DEI, if you're doing the work correctly, it never ends, because there's always some aspect of diversity among us that we always have to work hard to make sure we see people, we include people, and that's another question I don't come out, so I won't elaborate on that. And that we educate ourselves constantly. So I see DEI as never ending, and I think my colleagues in my league see it that way. So we've become visible, so people know who we are. You know, when I met the league, they were in my space at the Zion Heritage Museum on Cape Cod, which is a museum for people of color, Wampanoag people, African people, African-American people, people from the Caribbean islands, people from Brazil, and Cape Verde people. So that's why we say people of color. We don't have the masses of any one group, but collectively, we're about 14% of the population down there. So in that space, they came and they were there, and I was greeted by League of Women Voters. I'm like, who the heck is League of Women Voters? No, seriously. And so I'm retirement age. So I was in my 20s. No, I was in my 50s. I never heard of League of Women Voters. And I was like, my God, what they do is amazing. But I was still nervous. I don't want to join a room of white women. No offense to anyone, but everywhere I go on Cape Cod, that's it. I don't want to be the only one. And they did have a few people. So part of our efforts have been to recruit more women of color. And I realized today that I should be saying people of color. So there are men in the league and in our league. So it's recruitment efforts, but they're not empty recruitment efforts. As I said, I think the most impressive work, the League of Women Voters has done their homework. It's on our mission. The mission is the US mission is part of our mission statement on DEI. So you can go to the page, you can read our definitions, everything's there, links to the trainings and all of that. So I walked into that, and that's really important. The women of color know what I'm talking about. That it says you're welcome. We want you here. What do we do with you? I think that's part of the DEI committee. We have a DEI committee, but it didn't come till after. The board worked really hard to educate themselves. I did a couple of presentations. We went to the League of Women Voters MA presentation. The focus was on the board to get on the page and drive this. And then we formed our DEI committee. We had book readings and discussions, not easy books, difficult conversations with a Black man around the time of George Floyd. And then we had Heather McGee's book. Somebody help me out. The Sum of Us. And those were led by people of color, those conversations. And that's really important. And, we had groups where people discussed, and it gave us ideas of what to do, where to go. We also had a 2-part dialogue on race in our community. Is there racism? What is racism on Cape Cod? Because people think, oh, vacation land stuff doesn't happen. But if you saw the Channel 5 news a couple of days ago of an incident that happened in Hyannis, I'm not going to get into it, but it does happen on Cape Cod. And so we had panelists from different community organizations that support racial justice, social justice groups. So they were the experts from their community speaking. And our goal was to come up with a few things that we could do as community involving the league. And what else? Partners with those organizations for some of the work that we do, candidate forums, for example, so that we have questions that are important to those constituents that people might not think of, the underserved. Targeted recruitment efforts, young people, people of color, people with disabilities, bilingual members. We need everybody. Yes.
How do you define young people? Well, actually, can we take questions towards, we have a huge agenda here. Sorry.
In my notes, I have youth, which is, I'll answer it really quickly.
Okay.
High school age people and middle school, well, high school age people, because of where we're at right now. And young adults or people that have started into adulthood, over 21, they're working in their careers and so forth, okay? And also at some of our forums for keynote speakers, we've invited some of the people with cultural differences in our community, or the history is so important. And so we had a keynote speaker from the Wampanoag tribe at our membership meeting last year, and she gave us the reality of the view on voting and civic engagement so that we understand where we could help and we understand their concept of democracy and voting and voter engagement. So we're not imposing ourselves on people. We show up, present in the community, which has helped us get last year 26 new members. And I can tell you it was a diverse group of people. And we make public statements on issues that occur sometimes nationally, sometimes statewide, and most importantly, are in our community. So the incident that happened, we just wrote a statement that we're going to submit to the editor. Almost anything that's social justice, racial justice, not political statements. Some individuals do, but as the league, we make statements to let people know this is important. And please pay attention. And sometimes it's action items that as the league of MA is taking, or the league of the US League on certain things that we have really good people on our legislative committee and others who advise us,
Sorry,
right way
Jen, I
to
hate
say
to
things.
cut you off. Just
Okay.
'cause we have and you're already kind of going into the next question. and I
Okay,
wanna-
sorry.
No,
I
you're
do that.
fine.
You wanna
You're
stop
you're
me?
perfectly fine. The next question, you guys, all four of you kind of alluded to it already, but if you want to expand on it a little bit more, the question is, how do you make inclusion a focus in your league?
I would say from the Worcester area perspective, I can echo what you said. I am a product of diversity efforts as well. And I can say that I wouldn't have, this is just the soundtrack of Maine South, so I'll get into it. I work at Clark, so I get to hear it all the time. But I think that I wouldn't have committed voluntarily my time and energy as someone who, again, like has some of those intersectional identities that we are trying to include into the group without having seen the demonstrated commitment by the board already. And so when we sit through our strategic planning sessions, I feel valued, I feel heard. I think for when we think of inclusion, and I think of my own experience in terms of being in spaces that feel like they are for me or not for me, right? I think civic engagement and voting, the acknowledgement of that historical trauma, the acknowledgement of that distrust with community. I already had a good impression of the League of Women Voters because I was working in public health at vaccine clinics and seeing the league show up and table, and not just sit at the table and wait for people to come your way, but to actively engage, ask questions, engage in those difficult conversations with people who are completely disengaged from our civic process in our own community. And so to see that level of solidarity, I already knew that this was a group that I wanted to be a part of and continue to bring my friends into those spaces. I think the events, I think, you know, all of those things definitely show the face that we are committed to this when we have a panel and the panelists, you know, the panel's topic is not DEI, but our panelists are diverse, right? And so really truly integrating it into all aspects and seeing that level of commitment makes me feel that I am included and a part of this process. And never once have we heard anything, you know, otherwise. And so I think my advice would be if to DEI committees is to ensure that your board demonstrates their level of commitment to the work that you're putting into this, because otherwise, if it's not taken seriously, you don't see those outcomes starting in the events you're doing, in the forums, but also interpersonally through your dialogues in closed rooms. You know, that's how you show that level of commitment to inclusion from my perspective.
And I'll stand up in case you can't hear me. I would say that the DEI committee has been working very closely with our board, which has been very supportive and interested in hosting events that are on DEI. The DEI commission, I think, sort of looks to our league as its guider, as the entity which will help them figure out what to do next, how to do it. When they want to have a forum, they look to the league because the league knows how to set up a forum, how to host it, and we're very much partners. There is a plan to have a meeting at the end of the summer or early fall with all the various entities in Concord and Carlisle that are focusing on DEI work, because we have to do this together. We can't do it alone. And the league can be a facilitator, but it can't be the entity that makes it all happen, because frankly, we're not a diverse organization. I hope that through this work, we will become more diverse.
Thank you, Nancy.
I would agree. I think that's why we've prioritized so much taking our lead from partner organizations rather than trying to come in as, again, a league that is primarily white women and say, this is how we think these problems ought to be solved, or this is what we think should, you know, will address concerns of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, we very much recognize that this is something that we're a work in progress on. And so I think that our decision-making process is how we address this internally. What are the concerns we think about when we're deciding whether or not to act on something? And where to put our time and where to put our energy. Internally, we've had a lot of discussions about burnout. We're a fairly new league. We were very active our first few years. And I think with the pandemic, everybody's feeling a little bit burnt out. Maybe that's just us. But so it's become even more important with that consideration to think about how can we best serve our community, including the members that are not represented at the steering committee of the League of Women Voters Salem. And we feel we do that best by speaking to other community organizations that are already out there doing the work. Like, people don't necessarily need us to come in and fix the problem. They might just need more hands. And the league does have, a great reputation, which can be used to great effect to help other organizations. But I definitely think that, to your point, Nancy, that we ought not, as an organization that is not itself very diverse, try to kind of to overtake the conversation.
Okay. A lot has been said that I kind of want to sum up into a couple of words. One is authenticity, and the other is welcoming. So the trend now, DEIB, the belonging piece, is you can't really do that if you haven't done the first three. Right. So people, they kind of feel like they've raced to the belonging. So how people feel they belong and feel included is when they are genuinely themselves. And that might be hard. Think of yourself in a space where you are different and uncomfortable, and think of the things that need to happen to make you feel more comfortable. And again, I'll use my example of someone of color brought me to the league, but I was really hesitant to join and scared to death after I looked y'all up.
None of us hold a candle to you.
And going to this, what I vision is an elite group, way out of my boundary and sense of knowledge, and being invited to a December meeting. So people are all dolled up, and I, a woman of color convinced me to go. And so I went with her, the deal. You meet in the parking lot, you go in. And I'll tell you, it was like swoon. People came over to me, said welcome. And it was genuine. It didn't feel phony. Like, I felt like they really want me to be here. Whatever motivation they wanted me there for, I did. No, seriously. It might have been you're laughing, I'm not trying to be funny, but it might have been the DEI checkbox. The goal, get more women of color, check. But it was more than that, though. It was your gene. And with these, I felt like they would generally want to know my background, my name, where I live, all the normal things. And it didn't feel, and I'll tell you, some spaces on the Cape, you walk in, you're the only one. And there's a barrier. People get nervous and they don't know what to do. So you end up feeling like the island alone. So that was my crash course on, inclusion. But the next step was, once people got to know me and realize I talk a lot, I have a big mouth, but it's only because I have a lot to say. And they paid attention to what I had to say, and being identified as someone who can be part of this organization in a meaningful way. So within my first year, with my colleague Karen Mazza, was gracious enough to mentor me. I became co-VP because I realized real quick, they got a lot of work. I need someone to help. So she mentored me, and now I am co-president of the League of Women Voters area. That is inclusion, that you recognize, you welcome people, but to the point that they are themselves. So the only reason I'm there is because They created opportunity. I had the knowledge and the skill set. I fit, you know? That's inclusion, and it can't happen without welcoming. And that's all I'm gonna say, because they mentioned everything else.
This next question, and I love this question because it actually you may be able to draw some inspiration from their stories and be able to walk away with the charge for your own league. And that question is, what are the challenges you are facing in doing this work? And I'm sure there's quite a bit.
I think there are many, and I think that is normal. I think it was previously mentioned that DEI work is ongoing and it's not something that is achieved. And even though sometimes the D part, which is the diversity part, can feel like a checkbox, as someone who checks that boxes for many organizations myself, I realize that, but it's a lot harder to, I would say the challenge is in recruitment. And then the challenge is also in, you know, again, like, in our community that I see, there's many people doing a lot of work. And so it can be difficult to, you know, the burnout, the capacity, and acknowledging that equity piece, that if you want to have a diverse committee, people of color have different lived experiences and we have different commitments sometimes. And there is a lot more work that needs to be done. And sometimes you don't want to, as someone who is a person of color or Latina, it can be difficult to engage in conversations about DEI with a space of a majority white organization. And what you find is that in your communities, what you may find, I don't know, the people doing that work are doing that work for several organizations, right? And so how do you find ways of collaborating intentionally? How do you find ways of being an ally and amplifying so that the burden isn't only on your DEI committee, the burden isn't only on, you know, the Black folks in your organization, or the Latino people in your organization, or the queer people in your organization. So how do we work together to hold space for the people doing that work and also, you know, attract them to it, you know, like we do need that D before you can get to the E, I, and B, right? So, you know, and I think for me, what that came down to was a very personal recruitment style, right? Like holding a meeting with the person who was recruiting me, having a conversation, seeing the work. Obviously being mission driven is very important. And I think the mission is completely, you know, it's difficult to argue with, right? We do need civic engagement. Worcester, for municipal election, has 17% voter turnout. We are 50% BIPOC, right? We are 30% under the age of, you know, 18. So we are a young city, we're a diverse city, and it's not showing up in our municipal elections, right? So I care about that. And how do you send that message out so people can show up to the meetings while also having your league there to support you and hold space for you? That's the ongoing challenge.
I suspect we all have similar challenges, and in part, what might be a little different about Concord and Carlisle is that it doesn't have nearly as diverse a community as you have. And I don't know that people feel welcome. And our challenge, I think, is going to be, well, what do we do? What can the league do to make people feel welcome? We'd like to join the league. We'd like to see our league not be a bunch of older white women. Prime example. And we need to collaborate. I think collaboration is key. We're trying to do that, looking to the Human Rights Council. But there are organizations that we probably don't even know about. And one of the things we're going to do this summer, as we contemplate having a meeting this fall with a large body of organizations that are committed to this work, is finding out who they are, where are they, and how can we be more welcoming, because we would like to see a very different membership than that we have. Could you show us how?
We're all trying.
I think we certainly have a similar challenge, not in our community, but in our league. And I think it can be a little bit of a chicken or egg problem because we would like to welcome a variety, diverse representation of our community to be part of our league, and they are welcome to join. But no one wants to be the only one in the room. And that's not exactly where we're at, but I think it can feel like that if you go to our events. And we have to recognize that is a problem. We certainly do, but it's difficult to sort of overcome that hurdle of being fairly not diverse. I don't know. How do you make clear that people are welcome when they don't see themselves reflected? That's a challenge that we're still working on. But I think by being out in our community and forming connections with other groups, people will see, I'm hoping people will see that we are a safe organization, a safe and welcoming organization, or that we strive to be. Again, it's all a work in progress. I do think it was a particular challenge over the past 3 years because we weren't out in the community, right? We were doing a lot of our meetings on Zoom. We weren't, there was no like pride parade. There was no haunted happenings parade in Salem, which we love to participate in. So people weren't actually seeing us out and about. And I'm hoping that with a return to sort of more normal community, we can keep fostering connections and making people feel comfortable with us. But I think that's our biggest challenge, to be honest.
I'll say that's a challenge for us as well. But the biggest challenge is what I'm going to call the wow factor. So we talk about diversity being a work in progress. And what does that mean? It's a work in progress, like it can be very overwhelming. And to me, that is a challenge. So because it can be a block. And the work in progress is frustrating because individuals are at different levels of understanding, different levels of comfort, different levels of learning and wanting to learn. And so applying an across the board diversity program doesn't really work, and making it filtering it into the organization so it does work is an important step, but can be challenging. It can be a difficult step if you don't have the capacity to do that a little bit at a time. For us also, language is a barrier. On our job, we have a large and growing Brazilian population who speak primarily 2 languages, Portuguese and also Spanish. And I didn't know that, which tells me another thing. Barriers are a challenge. That meaning the barriers that you discover you can overcome. But every step of the way, if you're open and you really allow voices in and include people, you then start to see barriers you are unaware of. So sometimes in our unconscious mind, things can happen. We're unaware that they're happening, but somebody else knows they're happening. So how do you give everybody a voice whose voice isn't there? You have to constant assessment plays into that wow factor. It's a lot of work to do what we're asking ourselves to do as a league. And the other thing, the last thing I want to say, difficult conversations. And I'm not talking about language, I'm talking about issues. And I'll call it out. I'm talking about race. It's very difficult to have some deep conversations about race, whether it be Indigenous people, which by the way, we don't have enough conversations with them. You think Black people have something to say? Sit down and talk to someone who's tribal and entrenched in their culture. People are still living Indigenous culture in modern day. I'm not going to describe that to you because I want you to go find out from the Nipmuc people. and wherever they are in your area. The last thing I want to say is we try to do too much too fast. We want the end result. That's mainstream culture USA, right? We will, and the league are good stewards of that culture. And I mean that in a complimentary way. So it's like, I'll use a little bit of jargon, slow your roll. You're going too fast.
Yeah.
Succeed, pinpoint and succeed at the small things, do them well, and they will develop into the greater picture. That's how I get it together in my mind when I think about DEI, and I will, wow.
Thank you. Yay, thank you. So we are getting close to the end. So I'm going to skip one of the questions that we had because I think we kind of already touched on that. But here's another good question. What goal or goals is your league looking to achieve in the DEI space?
So many. I mean, after listening to this panel, there's so many great examples also here. I think I want to echo the idea of partnerships. I think we have demonstrated from the Worcester area partnerships through our events, partnerships through voter registration, but maybe also having more intentional partnerships. And what I mean by that is that there are more, race-based, cultural-based identity groups within Worcester that are also emerging, right? And so how can we strike up maybe, yes, tabling at our Juneteenth celebration and at Pride, but maybe doing something more substantial with the organization Queer the Scene or The Village, which is an Afrocentric community center that does do a market every third Sunday, right? And so having more meaningful relationships, because I think, yes, that translates into the voter registration, into the visibility piece, into being on community and on the ground. But these are our community-based organizations that are led by people of color and founded by people of color who've been doing this work. And so I think that trust building piece, when you are talking, absolutely slow your roll, like trust doesn't happen overnight. And, 2020 wasn't that long ago. And all of these things started happening in 2020, and people of color are, like authenticity is very important. And starting committees in 2020, it's like, okay, everybody did, right? So what else, right? Show me more. And I think demonstrating that long-term commitment with organizations that are led by community leaders that are people of color or diverse, that's how you build trust with organizations. You show up for them, you support them in terms of the efforts you can do. So I think that's something that I'm looking forward to taking away from this panel.
I would agree with everything you said. The big challenge for us is we're the League of Women and Voters, and we're thought of as very nice older women who support voting. And we can't be the only entity that is leading the way in Concord. So we are looking to collaborate. I think we're going to have many opportunities to do so, and maybe to support the growth of some of these organizations. We are currently, I know the DEI Commission, which is still getting off the ground and getting organized. It's been around for over 2 years, but it takes time to really begin to do things that are meaningful. They're just about to establish what their priorities are going to be. But I know that they're counting on the league to support them when they want to have public meetings, when they want to push for something. I think the first organization they're going to turn to is the league, and we can play a major role. They lack some of the sophistication we have about how to approach the legislature, how to approach, in this case, it's really the town. There'll be an effort to get a warrant article on the ballot next year for funding for the DEI director. And I know it was the league that got the warrant article on supporting a DEI director, and we need to be heavily involved in helping the commission through this process.
So our league will continue to be working on making sure translations are available for our events, making sure that the services, the information that we provide is actually accessible to our community, and continuing to strengthen and develop our partnerships within the community. We have some strong ones, but I think we can have some more. Our energy over the next year or so, we have our annual meeting next month. So I'm very excited to have been on this panel because great ideas for how we can renew our focus on inclusion. And our focus will be on continuing the work that we already have in flight with the goal of actually increasing the diversity of our own membership. That's what we're focused on, but really just being of service in the best way that we can to all of the members of our community. So I really appreciate hearing from everybody on this panel. It's really been very inspiring. Thank you.
It is inspiring. And, you know, I love the league. I tell everybody that. But when I say that, in certain communities, that they either know about the league and they have their view of who the league is and kind of a hands-off view, it goes a long way. So I appreciate all of you that are trying to increase the diverse representation of people in your communities, because it really is all about the relationship, just like it is for everything else, business, what the league does. So I just wanted to make that note. Our goals are everything. We apply the DEI lens across the committees. So we had a short education presentation on what DEI definitions are. And then we took apart that DEI lens model that the League of Women Voters US, and it's also on the MA websites, and met with each committee member. So it's not just the DEI committee's job, but I'll tell you what they're gonna do. It's everybody's job, from translation, partnerships, speakers, and forum topics that DEI lens is applied. And my colleagues here from the Cape, I'm right? I'm not making this up, see? So they deserve the hand because they're doing the work. The DEI committee itself, besides incorporating DEI goals across all the league's committees, does things to raise awareness on issues of DEI, and they meet monthly, and the member sits on the DEI committee for the MA League, the peer group, DEI peer group for the league. We hope to plan programs with more outreach relevant to diverse communities to encourage civic engagement. And I'm going to say voter registration. And before that, I didn't say that, but it's like you roll over it until I got the demographics of Massachusetts. Can I say it? Women, African-American men and women, African-American community, the lowest voter registration and turnout in the country. And we think we do real well with voter registration. And there's some other information. It's stuff like that. Ongoing education is one of our goals. So, and that's, as individuals, board members, that's bringing things to our membership. Because if they don't grow with the leadership, then you're not doing something right.
Jean, I hate to cut you off just because we're at lunch.
All right.
I know. That's the